My name is Edgar Seaton. I'm 64 years old, and 8 months ago my daughter looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Dad, either you serve dinner tonight or you leave this house." I had been living under that roof for 3 months, cooking every morning, doing laundry every week, sitting quietly in my room whenever they had guests, and for 3 months I told myself this was love, showing up, being useful, being there for my family. The night my daughter delivered that ultimatum, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I walked to my room, opened my suitcase, and packed with perfectly steady hands. The next morning, I left at 7 a.m. 1 week later, 30 missed calls. Before I tell you what happened, if you haven't subscribed yet, take a second to hit that button and like this video. And drop a comment. Where are you watching from? And what time is it where you are right now? Now let me take you back to April of last year, the day I first carried my suitcase into my daughter's house in Clarksville. The drive from Columbus took 5.5 hours. I timed it that way on purpose. Left early enough to miss the morning traffic through Cincinnati, late enough to arrive while the afternoon light was still good. 34 years of teaching high school history had made me a planner. I didn't know how to move through the world any other way. I had sold the house 3 weeks before. The 3-bedroom on Harwick Lane where my wife Margaret and I had raised both girls. The kitchen where she made coffee every Sunday morning. The garage where her gardening tools still hung on the pegboard 2 years after she was gone, because I couldn't bring myself to take them down. My daughter Meredith had called the month before, her voice warm and certain. "Dad, come live with us. What are you doing alone up there? We have the room." And I had thought, I genuinely believed, that this was what it sounded like, an invitation, a family choosing to be closer. The house in Clarksville was beautiful. 4 bedrooms, a 2-car garage, a backyard with a Japanese maple just starting to turn red. Derek came out to meet me in the driveway. He shook my hand, firm, practiced, the handshake of a man who has spent years making first impressions, and smiled. "Edgar, welcome. Hope you'll be comfortable here." Meredith squeezed my arm and showed me to my room. It was the smallest of the 4, tucked at the end of the hall, right next to the kitchen. Derek appeared in the doorway behind us. "Actually works out great for you," he said pleasantly. "Close to the kitchen. Convenient." I smiled and nodded. I thought it was a practical observation. It had the sound of something a man says when he's thought about logistics. It would take me 3 months to understand it was a job description. The first week I cooked breakfast once. Meredith had an early meeting and left before 6:30. The fridge was stocked. I was awake anyway. Old teachers don't sleep past 5:30, not even in retirement. So I made eggs, brewed coffee, put out the toast. It seemed like the natural thing to do. I'd cooked for my family for years after Margaret passed. I knew how a kitchen ran. Derek came down at 6:45. He looked at the plate on the counter, sat down, and ate. He didn't say thank you. He didn't say anything, actually, until he'd finished his coffee and was reaching for his keys. "That was good," he said. Then he walked out. The next morning he came down at the same time. 6:45 exactly. He looked at the stove, then he looked at me. I made breakfast. I'm not sure I made a decision. There was no moment where I said yes to anything. It just happened. And then it happened again. And by the 5th morning, it was simply the way mornings worked in that house. Nobody announced it. Nobody asked. Derek sat down, and I cooked, and the rhythm of it settled into the week like furniture settling into a room. The thing about this kind of arrangement is that it doesn't arrive with a contract. It arrives with a nod and a silent expectation. And before you realize what's happened, you've been performing a job for 2 weeks without ever agreeing to take it. One afternoon that week, Meredith passed through the kitchen while I was at the stove and stopped to watch me for a moment. "I don't know what I'd do without you, Dad," she said, and smiled. I smiled back. I thought it was affection. Margaret's voice came to me later, lying in bed. "The ones who take the most are often the quickest to say they need you." I pushed the thought away. That wasn't fair to Meredith. The first weekend, Derek had friends over to watch the game. Meredith knocked on my door around noon. "Dad, could you put together some snacks? Just 4 guys." She was already heading back down the hall when she said it, voice casual, like she was asking me to grab the mail. I put together a spread: chips, dips, sliced meat and cheese, some leftover chili reheated and set out in a bowl. 4 people sounded manageable. I'd fed larger groups for years. I knew how to work a kitchen under pressure. 7 showed up. I moved quickly, adding more: crackers, whatever I could pull together from the pantry. From behind the half wall between the kitchen and the living room, I could hear the game, the laughter, the easy back and forth of men who'd known each other a long time. The kind of afternoon I used to have myself, before Margaret died and the house went quiet. At one point, one of Derek's friends wandered to the kitchen doorway, drink in hand, looking at the spread on the counter. "Man, who made all this?" Derek's voice, easy and proud. "That's my father-in-law. He loves to cook." I was standing 3 feet away. He didn't look over. "He loves to cook." I stood at the sink and let that sentence pass through me. It didn't feel like gratitude. It felt like a classification. He cooks because he enjoys it, not because we asked, not because he's serving us. He just loves it. Clean hands. No obligation owed. That night I called Carol, a friend of mine from Columbus. She and Margaret had been close, and after Margaret passed, she'd stayed in touch with me the way good people do, without making a production of it. "Maybe I'm reading too much into it," I said. There was a pause. "Edgar," Carol said, "you spent 34 years reading a room full of teenagers. You know when something's off." I hung up and told myself I'd adjust, that it was still early, that family takes time to find its rhythm. That was my second mistake. By the second month, the laundry had been added. I'm still not entirely sure when it happened. One Tuesday I noticed Derek's shirts folded neatly on top of the dryer. He'd obviously done them himself. The following Tuesday, a pile of his clothes appeared outside my door, just sitting there on the hall floor. No note, no knock, just the pile, waiting. I washed them. I don't know why exactly. Habit, maybe. I've been doing laundry for a household for years. The same muscle memory that makes you check the mail when you walk past the box. But the pile appeared again the next Tuesday, and the one after that. There's something particular about a man being asked to do another man's laundry without being asked. No conversation, no acknowledgement, no exchange. Just an assumption, left on the floor outside your door. The Tuesday after that, I signed up for a woodworking class at the community center. Sessions every Tuesday at 6:30. I've been wanting to get back to it for years. I'd had a workshop in the garage on Harwick Lane and hadn't touched tools since the move. The first week, I went. It was good. 6 men around a workbench, the clean smell of sawdust, the particular focus that comes from making something with your hands. I drove home more settled than I'd felt in weeks. The second week, Meredith caught me grabbing my jacket at 5:15. "You're going out? Derek needs dinner at 6. I looked at her. "He doesn't know how to—" "Dad, please, I'm running behind." I put the jacket down. I never went back. A few days later, Derek stood in the doorway of the kitchen while I was wiping down the counter. He looked at the tiles above the stove with mild displeasure. "The upstairs bathroom's getting dirty." Not a question, not a request, a report, delivered to the appropriate department. I looked at him for a moment. I had spent 34 years in a classroom, and I knew the specific dynamic of a person who has decided you work for them. I'd seen it in administrators. I'd seen it in parents who confused a teacher with a service provider. I recognized it now. I turned back to the counter. "Meredith," I thought, "where are you?" But she was busy. She was always busy. And I was always available. Which, I was beginning to understand, had become the same thing as being always responsible. Derek's mother came for the weekend in late October. Patricia Calloway was 68, cheerful, and brought a pecan pie she'd driven 3 hours to deliver. She hugged Derek the way mothers hug sons they haven't seen in weeks. Both arms, eyes closed, the full weight of it. She praised the house. She admired the backyard maple. She was, by any measure, a warm and pleasant woman. Over dinner she mentioned, without being asked, that Derek had grown up in a home where there was always a hot meal on the table. "He never had to think about it," she said fondly. "I always just took care of everything. It was my joy." She smiled at me across the table. I smiled back. Later that evening, through the wall between the kitchen and the hallway, I heard Derek's voice. Low, not quite private. Mom never complained about any of it. She said it made her feel needed. He wasn't on the phone. Meredith was with him. I kept washing the dishes. I understood what he was doing. He was setting a standard. His mother was the correct model. I was the version that hadn't gotten there yet. The next afternoon, Meredith found me in the laundry room. I asked her, quietly and directly, Meredith, do you think I'm doing too much here? She frowned like the question didn't parse. What do you mean? Derek has never been rude to you. That was the entirety of her defense. No rudeness, therefore no problem. I thought about the laundry pile, the jacket I'd put down, the 7 men I'd fed without being introduced to a single one of them. None of it had required rudeness. That Saturday morning, for the first time, I didn't make breakfast. I made coffee for myself, sat at the small table in my room, and read. Derek came to the kitchen, opened the fridge, stood there a moment. Then he closed it. He didn't say anything, but from that morning on, he looked at me differently. I chose a quiet Thursday evening, Derek at a work dinner, Meredith home early for once, the house calm. I sat down at the kitchen table and asked her to sit with me. She set down her phone, which was something. Meredith, I want to talk about how things have been going here. She looked at me with the patient, slightly guarded expression of someone who expects to be criticized. I don't mind helping, I said. You know I don't. But I'd like to be asked. Before something gets added to my day, I'd like someone to check with me first. A pause. Then, has Derek said something to upset you? No, that's not, because he's told me more than once how much he appreciates you being here. I looked at my daughter. I'm sure he does. She heard something in that. Some edge she didn't like. Her face changed. Dad, I don't understand what you're asking. You're not working for us. You're family. Family. I held the word for a moment. Family who sleeps in the smallest room because it's convenient for the kitchen. Family who doesn't go to his class so dinner is on the table. Family who washes another man's clothes because they appear outside his door without comment. You're right, I said. I am family. I let the silence carry what I didn't say. Meredith picked her phone back up. The conversation was over. That night I lay on my bed in the small room next to the kitchen and stared at the ceiling. The suitcase was under the frame. I'd never bought the dresser I kept meaning to get. Some part of me, the part that knew things before the rest of me caught up, had simply never unpacked all the way. For the first time, I let myself think about leaving. But I had sold the house. I had nowhere to go. That was the thought that kept me there. Not love, not duty. The logistics of having made an irreversible decision. And somewhere underneath the logistics, the stubborn hope that I was wrong about all of it. The promotion came on a Wednesday. Derek walked in at 6:15, wearing the expression of a man who had been practicing his entrance all day. Regional Operations Director. The position he'd been angling toward for 3 years. The job that came with a significant raise, a corner office in Nashville, and a title he could say at dinner parties without adding any explanation. Meredith threw her arms around him in the kitchen doorway, the kind of embrace that belongs to people who are genuinely happy for each other. And I felt, watching them, the particular ache of seeing your child love someone the way you once hoped you'd see her loved. That part was real. Derek suggested celebrating with a dinner party. The following Saturday, 12 guests, the house. Colleagues, his boss Marcus Webb, a few close friends. Something that looked like success. Meredith turned to me before the sentence was fully finished. Dad, you'll help with the food, right? You're the best cook. I didn't answer immediately. I set down the dish towel in my hand. Help how? I asked. Help plan the menu or help cook it? She blinked. Cook it, obviously. And will I be eating with everyone? A flicker of something moved across her face. Not guilt, exactly. More like the look a person makes when an arrangement they've been comfortable with is suddenly named out loud. It's Derek's colleagues, Dad. It might be a little awkward. Awkward. I picked the dish towel back up. Sure, I said. I'll help. But something had shifted in me as I said it, quiet and absolute, the way things shift at the end of a long patience. I agreed to cook the dinner. What I didn't mention, what I hadn't fully formed into words yet, even to myself, was that I was already deciding something else entirely. The menu arrived by text on Monday morning. 6 dishes. Meredith had clearly put thought into it, or rather, Derek had. The formatting was his, bulleted, specific, no room for interpretation. Beef tenderloin, roasted fingerling potatoes, haricot vert with almonds, a Caesar salad from scratch, crab cakes as a starter, and a chocolate lava cake for dessert. I read it twice. I wasn't asked what I could make, or what I'd prefer, or whether 6 courses for 12 people was a reasonable request of one person working alone. I was informed of the outcome expected, and left to produce it. Tuesday, Derek added a note through Meredith. Tell your dad Marcus likes braised short rib, if he can fit it in. He knew his boss's preferred dish. He did not know, or had never thought to learn, whether I'd ever made braised short rib before. As it happened, I had. Margaret used to request it every winter, but that was beside the point. Wednesday, Meredith appeared in my doorway with a new request, delivered with the careful cheerfulness of someone asking for a very large favor while pretending it's small. Dad, would it be easier if you just stayed in the kitchen during the party? You know, to manage things as they come up? Easier for who? I asked. She smoothed the wrinkle from her sleeve. It would just flow better. Derek's guests don't really know you. I looked at my daughter. I had raised this person, helped her with homework at the kitchen table on Harwick Lane, sat 3 rows back at her college graduation, in the rain, and didn't move. And now I was being asked to remain invisible at a dinner party in a house where I cook 3 meals a day. I said, I understand. But I was already counting. 6 dishes, 12 place settings to wash afterward, 1 person expected to do all of it, and 0 seats at the table. Thursday night, after Meredith and Derek went to bed, I sat in my room with the lights low. The suitcase was still under the bed frame. I had walked past furniture stores in town 3 different times and never gone in. Some stubborn, quiet part of me had always known something I wasn't ready to say out loud. I opened my phone and scrolled to the last text thread Margaret and I had. The one from the summer before her diagnosis, before the world went quiet. We'd been planning a road trip through New England. She'd sent me a photo of a bed and breakfast in Vermont with the message, "You deserve some good mornings, Ed." I had laughed at the time. Now I read it differently. She had always seen me clearly, even when I couldn't. I called Diane. My oldest daughter answered on the second ring. She always did, the habit of a nurse who treats every call like it might matter. I told her everything. The laundry outside the door, the class I'd given up, the word awkward. She was quiet for a moment, then, Dad, do you want me to call Meredith? No, I need to handle this myself. Okay. A pause. Dad, you know you can come here. My guest room's just sitting there. She said it the same way Meredith had said, come live with us. But it landed differently, because it came without a list of dishes attached. After I hung up, I sat with the quiet for a long time. Then I opened a browser and looked up rental listings in Clarksville. Studio apartments, 1 bedrooms. The kind of small, manageable space where the only dishes in the sink are yours. My pension covered it. I had always known my pension covered it. I had simply never let myself think past the assumption that I needed to be here. That was the night I stopped telling myself I had no choice. I want to stop here for just a moment, not to step away from the story, but because something in me needs to ask you this. Have you ever been in a situation where you kept telling yourself just a little longer, and then one day realized you'd been saying that for months? Leave me a comment. I want to know. And if this story is reaching something in you, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Now, let me take you to the Thursday before the party, because that's when everything changed. Carol called Wednesday morning, 3 days before the party. She was in Nashville, visiting her son, had driven down from Columbus the week before, the way Carol did things, suddenly, practically, without making a fuss about it. She'd be in Clarksville Thursday, she said. Could we get coffee? We sat at a diner booth for 2 hours. I told her things I hadn't let myself say out loud before. Not just the facts, the laundry, the class, the kitchen at the party, but the feeling underneath all of it, the particular loneliness of a man who had built a life around being useful to people he loved, and was now being made useful to someone who didn't see the difference. Carol listened the way she always had, without interrupting, without fixing. When I finished, she set down her mug and said, "Edgar, you are not the help. You are her father." It was such a simple sentence, but simple sentences are the ones that land. We were still talking when Meredith pulled up to collect me. She'd insisted on picking me up, said she needed to run errands nearby. She came in for 5 minutes, bright and warm, and Carol was charmed, the way people always were by Meredith's social ease. As we were getting up to leave, Meredith turned to Carol. "Carol, are you busy Saturday? We're having a little dinner party. Derek just got promoted. You should come." Carol looked at me. A quick glance, barely a second. I gave her the smallest nod. "I'd love that," Carol said. In the car, Meredith chattered about the party menu, the flowers she'd ordered, the tablecloth she'd borrowed from a neighbor. She did not know that she had just invited the one person in Clarksville who knew exactly what had been happening in her house for the past 3 months. I looked out the passenger window at the town passing by and thought, all right, Saturday then. Friday night, I was in the kitchen at 9 o'clock, going through the pantry. Beef broth, check. Red wine, check. The short rib was already marinating in the refrigerator. I'd mapped out the timing for all 6 dishes. What could be prepped tonight, what needed morning, what needed to be plated last minute. 34 years of managing a classroom had made me good at logistics. I knew how to run a complicated operation alone. Meredith came in quietly. Derek wasn't home yet. Some after-work drinks with colleagues. She stood near the island and didn't say anything for a moment, which was unusual for Meredith, who filled silence the way water fills a container. "Dad?" I looked up. "Tomorrow is really important to Derek." She spoke carefully, like she'd been rehearsing. "I need everything to go smoothly. That means I need you focused on the kitchen, just the kitchen. Don't come out to the living room. Don't talk to the guests." I set down the pen I'd been using to check off my prep list. "Meredith, what are you saying?" She still wasn't quite meeting my eyes. "If you're not comfortable with that, if you think it's going to be too much, then maybe you should go stay somewhere else this weekend. Take a little break." Take a little break. She had packaged it as consideration, as though she were offering me a gift. I looked at my daughter for a long moment. She was 35 years old, and she was standing in her kitchen telling her father to either work in silence or disappear. And she had found a way to say it that made it sound like concern. I turned off the stove burner under the broth. "All right," I said. "I understand." I walked down the hall, into my room, and closed the door. At 11 o'clock, I pulled the suitcase out from under the bed. I didn't slam it onto the mattress or throw things in. I opened it the way I opened it on the first day, methodically, with both hands, setting it flat and unzipping it all the way around. I packed the way I'd always packed, clothes folded, not stuffed, books in their own section, toiletries in the zippered front pocket. Margaret always said I could be ready to leave for anywhere in 20 minutes. I didn't know then that this was a skill I'd actually need. There were things I didn't take. The navy apron I'd bought at the kitchen store on Main Street in my second week. I hung it on the hook by the stove, where it had always lived. The spare key to the house, on the ring Meredith had given me, I left that on the kitchen counter, and a piece of paper folded once on the cutting board. I had thought carefully about what to write. Not a speech, not an accusation. One honest sentence. I cooked with love, but I can't serve out of fear. I hope the party is everything you hoped for. At 11:30, I called Diane. She picked up immediately. "Dad, what's wrong?" "Nothing is wrong. I'm leaving in the morning. Can you book me a room somewhere close by?" A beat of silence. "Already done. Text me when you're in the car." That was Diane. No drama, no argument, No, are you sure? She trusted me to know my own mind. She always had. I set my alarm for 6:30, turned off the light, and lay down on the bed that had always been too narrow. I didn't sleep much, but it wasn't worry that kept me awake. It was the particular alertness of someone who has finally made a decision and is simply waiting for morning to act on it. Saturday, 6:47 a.m. The house was quiet in the way it only is when no one else is awake. That specific, thick quiet that belongs to early mornings in other people's homes. I carried the suitcase down the hall in two hands, the wheels lifted off the floor so they wouldn't roll. Meredith's door was shut. Derek was already out. I'd heard him leave for his morning run 40 minutes earlier, the front door clicking softly behind him. I set the suitcase down in the entryway and went to the kitchen. The note was on the cutting board where I'd left it. The navy apron was on its hook. The key was on the counter. Everything in order. I stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment. The morning light came through the window over the sink at a low angle, catching the edge of the cutting board, the stack of prep bowls I'd left out the night before. The braised short rib was still in the refrigerator. The 6 dishes, half prepped, waiting. I picked up my jacket. I walked to the front door. I did not look back. The drive to the hotel took 9 minutes. I checked in, rode the elevator to the second floor, set my suitcase on the luggage rack, and sat down on the edge of the bed. And then I did something I hadn't done in 3 months. I sat still, in a room that was mine, with no list and no task, and no one needing anything from me, and I breathed. Slowly, all the way down, the kind of breath you take when you finally understand how long you've been holding the previous one. I turned my phone off. For now, that was enough. 6 p.m., the cars began arriving. I wasn't there to see it, but I know how it would have looked. The porch light on, Meredith in the green dress she'd been planning to wear since Tuesday, Derek by the door in a blazer, the confident ease of a man standing in his own home on the best night of his career. What I do know, because Carol told me everything the following morning over breakfast, is that the kitchen was dark. No smell of short rib, no trays warming in the oven. The prep bowls rinsed and stacked. The 6-dish menu sitting in the refrigerator as raw ingredients, waiting for hands that were no longer in the house. Meredith found the note. Then she found the apron. Then she stood in the kitchen for 4 minutes before she called the pizza place on Route 41. Carol arrived at 6:15 and knew immediately. The house didn't smell like a dinner party. It smelled like a house. She set her bottle of wine on the side table and waited. By 6:45, Derek was moving through the room with his usual ease, hand extended for Marcus Webb, voice warm and practiced. Marcus was 51, silver-haired, the kind of man who fills a room without demanding it. He shook Derek's hand and looked around. Something smells good. Or wait, is it still coming? Pizza, Derek said. Change of plans. Keeps things casual. Marcus smiled politely. He wasn't a man who said what he was thinking in real time. He didn't need to. His face was already doing it. A few minutes later, he glanced around the room and asked, genuinely curious, Meredith mentioned her father was living here now. Is he joining us tonight? Derek smiled. He stepped out for the weekend. Needed some time. Carol was sitting 6 feet away. She heard every word. Marcus nodded, but the answer didn't quite close the question. It opened it. He just moved here, right? And he's already traveling? Derek's smile held. He's independent, comes and goes. I see. Marcus took a sip of his drink. I only asked because Meredith had mentioned he does a lot of the cooking. I was looking forward to meeting him, honestly. Meredith was across the room and didn't hear this part. Carol did. She had been quiet all evening. Pleasant, present, the way Carol always was in a room full of strangers. But she had also been listening. And she had spent Thursday morning in a diner booth hearing, in detail, what had happened in this house over the past 3 months. She set her glass down on the coffee table. Actually, she said, Edgar left this morning. The small cluster of people near the fireplace went still the way rooms go still when someone says something true. Marcus looked at her. Oh, is everything all right? He's fine, Carol said. He's staying at a hotel nearby. A brief pause, unhurried. Last night, Meredith told him he could either stay in the kitchen during the party or take the weekend off. Edgar chose to leave. The room didn't gasp. It did something quieter and worse. It absorbed. Derek's jaw moved once. He looked at Carol with an expression that wanted to be dismissive but couldn't quite get there. Meredith had crossed the room. She was standing just outside the circle now, very still. Carol didn't raise her voice or look at Derek when she finished. She spoke to Marcus, simply and without performance. Edgar is one of the finest people I know. I didn't want the wrong thing on record. The silence that followed was the kind that doesn't require a response, because everyone in the room already understood. Derek recovered quickly, or tried to. Carol, I appreciate you looking out for Edgar, but this really isn't. It's all right. Marcus's voice was calm, the kind of calm that costs nothing to deploy, but lands with full weight. We don't need to get into it tonight. He smiled, touched Derek on the arm once, and turned toward the drinks table. That was all. No confrontation, no accusation. Just a hand on the arm and a turn back, and something in the room rearranged itself permanently. The party continued, in the technical sense. People held their drinks, conversation resumed. The pizza arrived in flat white boxes and was set on the kitchen island, and people moved through the line with paper plates because Meredith couldn't find where she'd put the good napkins in time. But the evening had already decided what it was going to be. Marcus stayed another 35 minutes. He mentioned his daughter's soccer game in passing. He said goodnight to Derek with the same warmth he'd arrived with, which told Derek nothing and everything. People left in pairs, politely, at reasonable hours. By 9:40, the house was empty except for the two of them, and Carol, who stayed to help stack the pizza boxes. A gesture that was also, Meredith understood, a kind of witness. When Carol finally said goodnight and the door closed, Meredith sat down on the kitchen stool. The counter where I'd done 3 months of prep work was bare. The hook by the stove held the navy apron. The note was on the cutting board where I'd left it, and it had been there all evening. She picked it up. She read it again. I cooked with love, but I can't serve out of fear. Derek was standing in the hallway entrance. Neither of them said anything. My phone was still off when she called. I turned it back on Sunday morning. Not because I'd resolved anything overnight, but because it had been 24 hours and I thought Diane might be worrying. The screen lit up before the device had fully loaded, a scroll of notifications that took a moment to organize themselves into meaning. 11 missed calls from Meredith, 1 from Derek, 2 from numbers I didn't recognize, 1 from Carol, with a voice note attached. Just wanted to make sure you're okay. You are. Call when you want. I lay in the hotel bed and listened to the air conditioning and thought about what I felt. Not triumphant. Not relieved exactly. Something simpler. The quiet of a person who has done the hard, right thing and is now sitting with the aftermath of it. I called Diane. She's been calling me too, Diane said before I could ask. I told her you were safe and that I wasn't giving her your location. She sounded upset. She sounded scared. A pause. That's different from upset, Dad. But the thing she's scared of isn't what she thinks. I asked what she meant. She's scared you're gone. But she hasn't looked at why you left. Those aren't the same problem. Later that afternoon, Meredith finally reached Diane again. Diane told me about it the following morning. Meredith had cried. Said she didn't understand how things had gotten to this point. Said she needed Dad to come back. That she couldn't manage without him. Diane, who had never once sugarcoated anything in her 38 years, had answered, That's the problem, Meredith. You've been managing. With Dad. Not with him. There's a difference. And Dad's the only one who's been feeling it. The calls kept coming. 7 days. That's how long I stayed in the hotel before I moved into the apartment I'd signed for on Wednesday of that week. 372 square feet, second floor, a window in the kitchen that looked out over a small courtyard with a bird feeder nobody had stocked in a while. I counted the missed calls when I turned the phone on Monday morning. 30. 22 from Meredith, 4 from Derek, 3 from numbers that turned out to be mutual acquaintances Meredith had apparently recruited. and one from Carol, who had also sent a text that said simply, "The party was exactly as interesting as you'd expect. Call me when you're ready." I did not call anyone back that first morning. Instead, I drove to the apartment complex, reviewed the lease, and signed on the line. The property manager, a practical woman in her 40s named Renee, handed me the keys with the professional goodwill of someone who does not ask about circumstances. I called Carol that afternoon. She told me about the party in the steady, factual way Carol did everything, not to wound, but to bear witness. When she finished, I sat with it. "You didn't have to say anything," I told her. "You could have let it go." "I know," she said, "but that man was building a story about you in front of people who didn't know you. I just offered the other one." That evening I called Diane. "What's next for you?" she asked. "I signed the lease Thursday. The apartment is small but good. And there's a woodworking group at the community center on Tuesday evenings. I looked it up." A beat of quiet. Then Diane laughed, not loudly, but the kind that means something. "Good," she said. "Go build something." The following Monday, Derek walked into the office, expecting a new chapter. He'd received the promotion formally on Wednesday. The title was now on his email signature, the corner office technically his, as of the first of the month. He had planned the dinner party specifically to introduce himself in this new role to the people who mattered. To stand in his home, in a well-run house, and demonstrate the kind of man who had arrived. Marcus Webb was in the building by 8:15. Derek passed him in the hall near the coffee station at 9. "Morning," Marcus said. The tone was the same. The eye contact was different. Not hostile, just shorter. The way a person's gaze shifts when an image they were holding has been quietly revised. They did not go to lunch. They had gone to lunch every Monday for 7 months. Derek mentioned it to Meredith that evening. "Marcus is acting strange." She was sitting at the kitchen table, holding a mug with both hands. She had not cooked dinner. There was takeout on the counter, still in the bag. "Strange how?" she said, without much inflection. "Distant. I don't know." He opened the refrigerator and stood in front of it. "It'll pass." Meredith said nothing. A few days later, one of Derek's colleagues, a woman named Jess who had attended the party and who genuinely liked Meredith, sent her a private message. "Hey, just checking in. You seemed off Saturday. Everything okay at home?" Meredith read it twice and didn't respond right away. The party had been supposed to announce something. In the end it had, just not what Derek intended. Some things you can manage. The impression you make in a room is not always one of them. She found me Thursday afternoon. Diane had given her the hotel name, not my room number, just the name, and Meredith had asked at the front desk. The young woman there had called my room, and I had said, "Send her up." We sat in the small lobby on the second floor. Meredith was holding the note I'd left on the cutting board. She had clearly been carrying it for days. The fold was worn soft. She sat down across from me and didn't perform anything. No prepared speech, no strategic opening. She just looked at me and said, "Dad, I'm sorry." I didn't respond right away. I had learned, in 34 years of teaching, that the pause after an apology matters. What fills it tells you everything. "What are you sorry for?" I asked. She took a breath. "I didn't see you. I saw what was useful about you being there, and I told myself that was the same thing." She stopped. Then, quieter. "I was scared to see more than that, because if I did, I'd have to look at some other things too." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I had watched my youngest daughter for 35 years, and I understood, for the first time with clarity, that the harm she had done me was not simply carelessness. She had been managing her own fear for a long time, and I had been one of the things she used to do it. That didn't make it right, but it made it human. "I love you, Meredith," I said. "That hasn't changed. But I will not live that way again. Not for anyone." She nodded. Her eyes were wet. She didn't argue. That too was something. The 30th call came Friday evening at 8:43 p.m. I was sitting in the hotel chair with a book and a cup of coffee, and when the name appeared on the screen, I held the phone for a moment before answering. It was Derek. Mr. Seaton. He had never called me that before. 3 months in his house, and it had always been Edgar, which I had accepted because correcting it would have required a conversation neither of us was willing to have. Mr. Seaton sounded strange, more formal than our relationship had been, and more honest. He didn't apologize. I hadn't expected him to. Men like Derek don't often have that particular vocabulary ready for their own behavior. But he was quiet in a way I hadn't heard from him before. The silence of someone sitting with something uncomfortable. I didn't think it would go like this, he said finally. I know, I said. Another pause. I thought about leaving it there, letting him end the call on the awkwardness of it. But there was something I'd wanted to say, and the moment was open. Derek, I said, the thing I care about most isn't what happened between you and me. It's that my daughter felt she couldn't tell you the truth about something without consequences. That's what I'm asking you to sit with. He didn't answer right away. Then the line clicked. He didn't call back. I didn't expect him to, but I meant what I said, and I believed, and the way you believe things you can't prove, that it landed somewhere. Not because Derek was ready to hear it, but because certain things once spoken plainly don't fully disappear. I finished my coffee. I went back to my book. Diane flew in Saturday morning. I picked her up from the Nashville airport at 10. That familiar face coming through the arrivals door, practical carry-on, sensible shoes, the unhurried walk of someone who has seen enough emergencies to know this wasn't one. She hugged me for a long time, the way you hug someone when you want them to feel that it's solid, that it holds. We drove to the apartment. Diane walked through the 372 square feet with the thoroughness of a person inspecting a property, running a hand along the kitchen counter, testing the window latch, looking out at the courtyard below. Good light, she said. You can set up a reading corner there. You spent the afternoon at estate sales and the secondhand furniture place on Market Street. I needed a table, 2 chairs, a bookshelf, a lamp. Diane kept trying to add things, a side table, a coat rack, and I kept telling her no. I wanted only what I'd chosen. I fill it slowly, the way you fill a life you're actually living. At the hardware store, I stopped at a display near the entrance. They had a small set of hand tools on a pegboard, the same kind Margaret had hung in the garage on Harwick Lane. I bought a set, hung them on a strip of pegboard I cut and mounted above the small work table I'd set up by the window. Not the same tools, but mine. That evening, Diane and I cooked dinner together in my small kitchen. Pasta, simple, a bottle of wine, the window open to the October air. I sat down at my own table, in my own chair, and ate. Diane raised her glass. She didn't say anything, which was exactly right. 3 weeks after the party, Meredith told me she'd started seeing someone. Not a doctor, not a friend, a therapist. She said it the way people say things they've been practicing, careful and a little vulnerable. She's helping me understand some patterns, Meredith said. Things I didn't realize I was doing. We were on the phone. I was in my kitchen making coffee, looking out at the courtyard where I'd finally stocked the bird feeder. I'm glad, I said, and I meant it, without reservation. I don't know where things are going with Derek, she added. I don't know yet. You don't have to know yet. A breath on her end. Dad, did you know? Before you left, did you already know this would happen? I thought about it, honestly. No, I said. I just knew I couldn't stay. She was quiet for a moment, then... I think that took more courage than I understood. I watched a cardinal land on the feeder outside, dip its beak, fly off. It didn't feel like courage at the time, I told her. It just felt like the only true thing left to do. The first Tuesday in November, I walked into the Clarksville Community Center at 6:25. The woodworking group met in a back room that smelled like sawdust and linseed oil. 6 men around a long workbench, projects at various stages, the kind of easy quiet that comes from people focused on making something with their hands. The organizer, a retired contractor named Bill, extended his hand as I came through the door. Welcome, You said on the phone you've done this before? Years ago, I said. I had a workshop. Had to give it up when I moved. Bill nodded. He handed me a set of safety glasses. Then you already know the best part. What's that? The wood doesn't care who you are, he said. It just responds to how you work it. I sat down, pulled on the glasses, and picked up a piece of oak that had been waiting on the bench. I ran my thumb along the grain. I found the angle of the light, and I began. I was in it, not useful to anyone else's schedule, not filling a role, not managing someone else's expectations. Simply present, with my hands on wood and my mind on the work. That was enough, more than enough. Looking back now, what I understand is this. I confused being needed with being loved. Those two things can coexist, and in a healthy family they often do. But they are not the same thing, and when one replaces the other, what's left isn't love. It's a transaction dressed up in the language of family. I spent 3 months cooking, cleaning, and making myself invisible because I had confused the fact of being useful with the feeling of belonging. After Margaret died, after the house went quiet, and the classroom no longer needed me every morning, I had mistaken the weight of being depended on for the warmth of being wanted. It took an ultimatum, blunt and graceless as it was, to show me that the two had come completely apart. I don't regret going to Clarksville. I don't even regret those 3 months, not entirely. They taught me something about myself that I needed to know, that I still had it in me to walk out of a situation that wasn't right. That 64 is not too old to reclaim a life. If you are in something that has been asking you to be smaller than you are, you don't have to announce it. You don't have to win the argument. Sometimes you just pick up the suitcase, quietly, steadily, and go. Before I go, I want to ask you one question. Leave it in the comments. If you were in my position, the moment Meredith handed me that ultimatum, would you have stayed or would you have packed? There's no wrong answer, but I think the one that comes to you first, without thinking, says something real. And if any part of this story stayed with you, there are more in the description below. I'd love for you to listen. Thank you for being here today.